The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky blazed with orange and purple hues. It was a spectacular sight, especially for a town like Absolution. Absolution was a dusty little town. It boasted a saloon, a general store, and a whole lot of nothing. Not much happened in Absolution, but tonight the silence would be broken. A lone figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. His name was Laurence. Laurence Zion wasn't born in Absolution. He drifted into town 10 years ago. Back then, the town was even wilder. Outlaws and gunslingers ran rampant. But Laurence had a way about him. He brought order to the chaos. He became the sheriff. He was the only one crazy enough to take the job. The townsfolk liked him well enough. He was fair, even-handed. He kept the peace. The silence was shattered by the shrill whistle of a train. It was the noon train from Yuma. It was 2 hours late. Laurence narrowed his eyes. The train was never late, not unless there was trouble on board. A figure emerged from the cloud of steam. He was tall and wiry, with a cruel sneer etched on his face. Laurence knew trouble when he saw it.
"You the law around here?"
The stranger stopped a few feet from Laurence. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt.
"Name's Rattlesnake Jake Slade, and I don't much care for the law."
Laurence remained silent. He'd heard of Rattlesnake Jake, a ruthless outlaw with a reputation for violence and a quick draw.
"Heard this town had a new shipment of gold coming in on the evening train. Figured I'd drop by and relieve you folks of the burden of guarding it." Lawrence's jaw tightened. He slowly reached for his badge, his fingers wrapping around the cold metal.
News of Rattlesnake Jake's arrival spread through Absolution like wildfire. Townsfolk scurried for cover, bolting their doors and peering nervously from behind curtained windows. Only one place remained open, the dusty Spur Saloon. And that's exactly where Rattlesnake Jake headed, his spurs jingling ominously with each step. He pushed through the swinging doors, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Laurence at the bar, his back turned.
"Looks like we got ourselves a standoff, Sheriff." The saloon fell silent. Laurence slowly turned, his face expressionless.
"You're making a mistake, Slade."
The tension in the saloon was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Laurence didn't flinch. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers closing around the glass of whiskey on the counter.
"You want a drink, Slade?"
"Sure, Sheriff. Why not? A final toast, shall we?" Laurence nodded, pushing the glass towards Jake.
To Absolution, Jake snatched the glass and downed the whiskey in one gulp.
The saloon door swung open with a bang. Laurence didn't need to turn around. He knew Rattlesnake Jake was long gone. He'd bought himself a few precious minutes, that's all. But Jake wouldn't get far, not if Laurence had anything to say about it. He downed his whiskey, the amber liquid burning a trail down his throat. He tossed a coin on the counter, got out, mounted on his horse Bell, and began his chase.
Belle surged forward, her powerful legs eating up the ground. The desert wind whipped at Lawrence's face, stinging his eyes. He squinted, trying to make out Jake's silhouette in the gathering darkness. He pushed Belle harder, urging her onward. The canyon walls loomed ahead, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. Laurence knew this canyon like the back of his hand. There was only one way out, through Devil's Pass. He had to stop Jake, no matter the cost. Laurence hauled back on the reins, slowing Belle to a halt. He couldn't follow Jake into Devil's Pass, not in the dark. He'd lose him for sure. He dismounted, his eyes scanning the train as it thundered past. There, a flash of movement in the last car. Jake. He was getting away. A length of rope dangled from the last car. We got ourselves a train to catch.
Laurence swung himself onto Belle's back, his eyes fixed on the receding train.
"Yeah, come on, Belle."
He dug his heels into Belle's flanks, urging her forward with a guttural cry. The train was a blur of iron and steam, its wheels pounding a relentless rhythm against the steel tracks. Laurence felt a surge of adrenaline as he closed the distance. Belle strained against the reins, her powerful muscles working overtime as she raced alongside the thundering train. Laurence leaned low over her neck, his eyes fixed on the swaying rope. He could feel the heat radiating from the train's engine, smell the acrid tang of coal smoke.
Almost there, just a little closer.
He had to get close enough to touch the iron monster without being crushed beneath its wheels. Laurence felt a moment of pure exhilaration, of living on the edge of a knife.
Come on, Belle, we can do this. He raised his arm, the lariat spinning above his head like a lasso of destiny.
Laurence let out a yell, a primal scream of exertion and defiance as he launched himself towards the rope. For a heartbeat he was suspended in mid-air, caught between the thundering power of the train and the relentless pull of gravity. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He could feel the wind whipping at his face, tearing at his clothes, and then his fingers closed around the rough hemp of the rope. The world snapped back into focus.
Got it! He gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming in protest as he held on for dear life. Laurence pulled himself hand over hand, his body a dead weight against the unforgiving rope. Every muscle in his body burned, screamed for him to let go, to give up. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Not while Jake was still out there.
Slowly, painfully, he hauled himself up the side of the train.
Finally, his fingers grasped the edge of the train car's roof. He pulled himself up, collapsing onto the metal surface, gasping for breath. He had caught his ride. Now it was time to catch his man.
Laurence dropped silently into the cargo car, landing cat-like on his feet, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. He crouched low behind a stack of wooden crates, his breath steady and controlled, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The shadows played tricks on his vision, but he remained focused. The air was thick with the smell of dust and something else, gunpowder. It was a scent he knew all too well.
Rattlesnake Jake was pacing the length of the car, his boots echoing softly in the confined space, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern. The light cast eerie shadows, making him look even more menacing. He was talking to himself, muttering words that Laurence couldn't quite make out, his voice a low, menacing growl. It sent a shiver down Laurence's spine, counting his loot, no doubt. Laurence smiled grimly, knowing the element of surprise was on his side. The element of surprise was on his side. He drew his revolver, the metal cool and reassuring in his hand. "Don't move, Slade." His voice was steady, filled with authority.
Jake froze, his head snapping up. The sudden command had caught him off guard. His eyes widened in disbelief, unable to comprehend how Laurence had managed to sneak up on him, then narrowed into slits of pure hatred. He was cornered, and he knew it.
You! How the hell did you get on this train? His voice was filled with a mix of anger and fear.
Doesn't matter how, Slade. What matters is you're caught. Now drop your iron. Laurence's voice was unyielding, leaving no room for negotiation.
Rattlesnake Jake hesitated, his hand hovering above his gun. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent standoff that seemed to stretch on forever. Laurence could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing his options. Every second felt like an eternity as he watched Jake's eyes dart around, searching for an opening. There was a long moment of tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels. The sound seemed to echo the heartbeat of everyone present, a steady reminder of the stakes at hand.
Then with a snarl of rage, Jake went for his gun. His movements were quick, but not quick enough.
Laurence fired. His reflexes were honed from years of practice, and his aim was true. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space of the cargo car. Smoke filled the air, adding to the chaos of the moment. Jake staggered back, clutching his shoulder, a look of surprise etched on his face. He hadn't expected Laurence to be so fast, so decisive. He stumbled, his boots tangling in a loose rope, and crashed to the floor, the mighty outlaw brought low by a single shot and a twist of fate. Laurence kept his gun trained on the fallen outlaw. His eyes were cold, his resolve unshaken.
"Don't even think about it, Slade. It's over." His voice was steady, leaving no room for doubt.
He moved closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. Each step was deliberate, a testament to his determination. He bent down and disarmed Jake, tossing the outlaw's gun aside. The weapon clattered against the floor, a symbol of Jake's defeat. Jake glared up at him, his face contorted in a mask of pain and fury. His pride was wounded as much as his body.
"You'll regret this, lawman, you hear me? You'll regret this." His voice was filled with venom, but there was a hint of desperation too.
Maybe, but at least I can live with myself. Lawrence's words were a quiet declaration of his own moral code.
He hauled Jake to his feet, ignoring the outlaw's curses and threats. The struggle was real, but Lawrence's grip was firm. He had a prisoner to secure and a train to stop. The responsibilities weighed heavily on his shoulders. He knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that this victory would come at a price. The cost of justice was never cheap. He had apprehended a dangerous outlaw, but he had also broken the law. The line between right and wrong had blurred. He had fired his gun on a moving train, endangering the lives of innocent passengers. The echoes of the gunshots still rang in his ears. The citizens of Absolution might see him as a hero, but the law wouldn't be so forgiving. Applause could not erase the consequences of his actions. He had crossed a line that once crossed changed everything, and there was no going back. The path ahead was uncertain, but Laurence knew he had to walk it, no matter the cost. The train screamed to a halt, its brakes screeching in protest, echoing through the stillness of the early morning. Outside, the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of pink and gold, casting a serene glow over the rugged landscape. A new day was dawning, but Laurence Ixion's life was about to change forever. He stood there, taking in the beauty of the sunrise, knowing that his actions would have lasting consequences.
He marched Rattlesnake Jake off the train, the outlaw's hands bound tightly behind his back, the clinking of the handcuffs a stark reminder of the law he had sworn to uphold. A crowd of bewildered passengers watched in silence, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had heard the commotion, the gunshots, and now they saw the result. The townsfolk of Absolution, alerted by the train's unscheduled stop, gathered around, their eyes wide with curiosity and concern. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the events that had transpired. They had heard the gunshots, seen the smoke billowing from the train's engine, and now they stood, waiting for answers. They knew something big had happened, something that would change their town forever.
Laurence looked out at the assembled crowd, his face grim, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his decision. He had done what he believed was right, but at what cost? He could see the questions swirling in their eyes, the unspoken accusations. They trusted him to uphold the law, but now they wondered if he had gone too far. He had broken the law, their law, to bring a dangerous criminal to justice. It was a decision that weighed heavily on him. He unpinned his badge, the silver star glinting in the morning light, and held it out to the stunned crowd. This was his resignation, his way of saying he could no longer be their sheriff.
Rattlesnake Jake is in custody, he announced, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. But I'm no longer your sheriff. He handed over the badge, a symbol of his authority and his burden. I broke the law to uphold it, he confessed, his voice filled with conviction and regret. Judge me as you see fit, he said, opening himself up to their judgment, knowing that his fate was now in their hands.
He dropped the badge at his feet, the metal clanging against the wooden platform like a hammer blow, a final act of defiance and resignation. Silence descended upon the crowd, a heavy, expectant silence that spoke volumes. The only sound was the gentle sigh of the wind, carrying with it the scent of dust and the promise of a new day. It was a moment of transition, a turning point for everyone present. Laurence Ixion, once the law in Absolution, was now just another drifter, his fate hanging in the balance. He looked into the distance, contemplating the uncertain road ahead. Subscribe to see more of Laurence's moronic adventures and follow his journey as he navigates the complexities of justice and redemption in the Wild West.